I'm not really into the idea of putting artists on pedestals, but one legit reason why we hold them in such high regard is simply because they can, just by doing what they do, have a massive impact on our lives. And the first drummer that I can name that had such an impact on my own life wasn't the fastest, the most technical, or even the most creative of drummers. But from him, I learned a lesson that goes way beyond just drumming. And the drummer in question is Nick Mason from Pink Floyd.
Once I started playing the drums, I was already a fan of Pink Floyd, and I realized I never truly paid attention to the drumming in their music. Here I'm talking about my mid-teenage years basically. And only then I took the time to pay close attention to Nick Mason's drumming.
And I gotta say that I wasn't particularly impressed. I was underwhelmed even, because I loved the music so much, but the drumming felt so okay, not bad by any means, but also not particularly remarkable. And looking back at it now, I gotta admit that that was a very limited way of looking at things from my part.
It took me some growing to realize that the reason why I love their music so much wasn't simply because of the depth of their lyrics, the beauty of their melodies, or the brilliance of their arrangements. It was the sum of all of those moving parts and more that made Pink Floyd's music what it was and still is. All of those elements working together perfectly to deliver the songs that we know and love. And with that understanding, my perception of Nick Mason's drumming changed completely. His drum parts are exactly what Pink Floyd needed in order for their music to hit just the right way. They were creative enough for them to have a personality of their own, while being in the backdrop enough for the start of the show, the guitar playing, the lyrical content and so on, to shine. A different drummer on his place, even one that could be considered better from a technical point of view, wouldn't deliver the performances that made Pink Floyd the legendary band that it is.
So imagine that, no Nick Mason, no Pink Floyd. I suppose that all of that sounds pretty obvious to some of you, but keep in mind that I was just a dumb teenager, so give me a break.
Looking at Nick Mason's drumming made me understand the roles that different musicians play on different ensembles, and also that playing to your role is the secret behind musicality, because he is not amongst the fastest, the most technical, or the most creative drummers out there, but he's definitely one of the most musical ones. And the impact that understanding this had on me goes way beyond just music. And that made me see that in life we also have roles to play, and the road to a fulfilled life is simply by identifying those roles and performing them well. For some, it will be to become the fastest or the most proficient. For others, it will be creating the circumstances that allows for all of that to happen. Or it might even be something else entirely. And for whatever it is, it's okay, for as long as you do it well and fulfill your role.
That lesson was already extremely meaningful to me, but now I realize that was only part of a whole, and it was the second drummer that changed my life that taught me the rest, because he reinforced what I learned from Nick Mason, but he made me see it in a completely different way. And no, regardless of what the thumbnail may suggest, is not this guy. But before we get to the drummer in question, if this is your first time here in the channel, I welcome you. And here we talk about everything that goes in the making of our own music, in the hopes that it will inspire you to make yours as well. So if the topic of making music interests you, I invite you to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and ring the bell, because that way more videos like this one can find their way to you very soon. Let's keep going with the video.
So, quick recap. From Nick Mason, I learned that we need to play to our roles, both in music and in life. But that wasn't the whole of it. There was still a piece missing from the puzzle, and it was Peart who granted me the view of the full picture. When it comes to drumming, he is very far from Nick Mason in most ways, but they share the commonality of both fulfilling their roles to perfection.
But how then? Nick Mason, who played in a very simple and kinda out-of-the-way style, and Peart, who showcases buttloads of skill and technique in every single Rush song. How can they be performing their roles equally well? What I learned from him is that context matters.
We don't live in a void. Yes, we are the product of our decisions, but also of the circumstances and the environment that we are inserted in. But the good part is that and this is what Peart taught me, we can shape our circumstances as well. Peart is not at the backdrop of music, he's at the very center. In most music by Rush, the drumming is the most remarkable and recognizable part of it.
One widely accepted view of drummers is that we play a support role, meaning that we need to stick to the backdrop and create the stage, set the stage for the other musicians to shine. But if that's the case, does it mean that Peart wasn't performing his role as a drummer well? Of course it wasn't the case, he was great at it, but he was redefining that role. What he taught me is that the role you play is not defined by where you stand. Being a drummer, for instance, is defined by who you are and your power to shape the circumstances around you.
Rush's music was created under the auspices of who Peart was. In being so, knowing that they had one of the best drummers in history, they also knew that his playing should be central to their compositions. Both Nick Mason and Peart were exactly what their bands needed them to be in completely different ways. That whole thing about drummers sticking to the backdrop to let the other musicians shine is quite often a very good definition of the role of a drummer. But that's definitely not always the case. It's up to the individual to identify the role they play, and it's also up to each and every one of us to shape ourselves and the circumstances in a way that allow us to be who we know we are meant to be. Personally, understanding that was a big eye-opener. It allowed me to see that I didn't need to conform to pre-established roles. They may serve as guidelines, because they exist for a very good reason, as showcased by Nick Mason, who is considered by many the best definition of what a drummer is and should be. But in the end, you as an individual have the power to create your own path, for as long as you make sure that it leads to the fulfillment of your role. And some of you may be thinking already, all this talk with circumstances and roles, it all sounds way too vague. But that's just it, isn't it? That's where the individual comes in. Because good lessons mean nothing if you don't bring them into your own life. My life was changed by these two drummers that I mentioned. But I had to do my part for it to happen as well. Because I would never have gotten to these conclusions if I weren't actively pursuing growth. Someone who's on the lookout for knowledge will find it in places that others would see nothing of value. So look for it. I'm sure you'll find it. So those were the two drummers that changed my life. And what about you? You have any musician or any artist that ever had a life-changing impact on you? Please let me know in the comments. Now, if you found something of value in this video, please leave a like. It helps the channel a lot. And if you wish to go even further, you can listen to our music on Apple Music or Spotify. And follow us on social media such as Instagram and X, where we can be in touch in a much more personal way. And with this, there's only one thing left to be said. Never let anybody tell you what to dream about. And remember that I'll see you when I see you.